Read me the headline, Stephen.
So this is from the Daily Mail, which I know, consider your source, but this is Daily Mail. This was published on May 31st of this year, and it is an exclusive. Ultra-processed foods do not cause obesity, says U.S. government's top diet advisors in bombshell review of current evidence. Studies have been biased. So we get into the top of the article here. The U.S. government's top dietitians found, quote, limited evidence these foods cause people to gain weight faster than any other food after reviewing more than a dozen studies dating back to the 1990s.
These foods being processed foods, or do they actually list food?
So ultra-processed foods, which we can get into the sort of murky definition of what ultra-processed foods are, but these are, your packaged foods that you typically associate, your Pop-Tarts, your Lucky Charms, your Chips Ahoy, all that kind of stuff.
Got it. Well, we should get into this. I mean, so this just came up. I mean, this is a relatively recent article, correct?
Yes. So there is some goings on in terms of the U.S. government and the dietary guidelines.
Do tell. I want to know.
I shall. So the U.S. dietary guidelines for Americans come out every 5 years. And obviously, we're at the midway point in the decade, 2025. So there was the guidelines for 2020 to 2025. And now the government agencies are working on the guidelines for 2025 to 2030. So they are reviewing some information currently.
I cannot wait. Obviously, anything the government is putting out in terms of guidelines, in my opinion, should be questioned. I question them all the time anyway. I always do. I mean, they're guidelines. Like who's coming up with these? Why are these? What's the agenda? Is this whose best interest is this really in? The government doesn't have anybody's best interest except for themselves. That's my personal opinion. But at the same time, like, I don't know, do the math, read some books, look at some history or whatever. The frightening part is we're talking about health and wellness. And I think in the last 5 years since 2020, man, did the government really shit the bed in terms of, I would guess, just portraying that they were in the public's, the public's health was in their best interest. And so now here we're coming in on probably, I'm going to say at least 4 decades probably now, I guess it would be, of just massive mistakes, misinformation, misguided probably in a lot of levels, information about dietary guidelines. I mean,
they're all over the place.
And they've been here forever. We're just constantly trying to sift through and undo stuff. And when I say we, I'm talking about like the fitness community at large, the medical community at large. And what I think the interesting thing as we get into this is, why should people be concerned about this? Oh man, it's fine. Like we're all going to eat a little bit of processed food. That's true. We're going to. I mean, it's just, it's the way it is. It's also, we're in the 21st century now. So we're going to get, and things aren't altogether bad. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that. But I guess my point in saying all of that is, when you go down this path of, it's not that bad, right? Well, if you keep doing that and you keep putting it off, who ultimately gets hurt here? Well, maybe you're not eating that stuff, but guess what? You're paying for the problem. You're paying for the problem at the checkout counter at the grocery store. Every time you pay that insurance policy, that medical insurance policy or health insurance policy, every time you go to the doctor, as infrequently as you may go, you're paying for this stuff, because at the end of the day, like, I heard what you read. Interestingly, I have my own opinion on this. I bet that really surprises you.
Shocked.
But I want to get into this a little bit. And I think it's important that people listen to this is, they try to sift through the information, but maybe also try to help other people sift through the information as a non-subject matter expert or, whatever. Yeah. So I don't know, man. That's just when you came up with this and came to me with it, I was just like, oh, geez, like, I really wish this wasn't happening. I really wish I could ignore this, but I don't think we can. So here we are talking about it.
Yeah, and it might be easy to say, oh yeah, the U.S. dietary guidelines, the food pyramid, whatever. I don't pay attention to any of that stuff. I know that that's maybe, that's not the best way to go about it. But the fact is, like you said, this becomes a systemic thing. So these U.S. dietary guidelines they're they're going to affect manufacturing policies. They're going to affect agricultural policies. They're going to affect food assistance programs. They directly affect what is allowed in kids' school lunches. So you can say, well, yeah, I don't eat like that. I know that that's not how, that ultra processed foods are not what I should be focused on, but it does have these trickle down effects. And these guidelines do affect, food policy and the food industry. And we all are a part of that.
Yeah. Indirectly and directly, what we pay for. And I just mentioned a few of those things that are not food. Right. So, well, the grocery store line's a different situation, but yeah, it is. It's endemic, which in a way has created an epidemic with regard to the obesity issue and all the things that come along with obesity. With regard to like all-cause mortality, and then obviously if that's going up, like the expense to take care of that or prolong somebody's path to the grave. Just becomes more and more expensive, and we're all sucked into it. So I don't want to make it all negative, though, if I'm being honest. Like I'd like to think along the way that there are some good things that have come out of these policies. Mm-hmm. Maybe it is just driving more people, maybe like us, to talk about it and try to provide some context for people. But also, maybe there's some things in there that people have taken away, and sometimes taken away in a positive way is what I'm saying. But also, look. When policies change and it creates challenges for food manufacturing, they have to change a way they manufacture something, package something, deliver something, whatever it is.
Ends up costing them more.
Costs them more. And they don't
like that.
And they don't like that. So exactly. So that can be problematic. Where are they cutting corners? What are they doing to reduce costs of this new process or policy, that they have to deal with? So that could be hitting somebody's paycheck out there, right? Mm-hmm. But it could also be hitting somebody's sense of well-being and actual well-being if they're cutting a corner, starting with using some other lesser quality ingredient to manage costs and overhead and all those kind of things. So it's much larger than, come on, man, I just don't eat that much processed food anyway. I'm fine.
Exactly.
I'm fine.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point to make for all the reasons that you mentioned. Like, we now have a significant body of evidence that there is at least a connection. Maybe we can't say causation, but there's definitely a connection between the excessive consumption of ultra-processed foods and the epidemic of lifestyle diseases that we experience in this country, in diabetes, in cancer. All of these things are just, they're off the rails in our country. And
totally.
because of that, now it's the U.S. Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. These are a group of nutritionists.
Who are these people?
Yeah,
man?
They're nutritionists. They're dietitians. They are, the top dietary advisors in the U.S. Because of all this evidence that ultra-processed foods are causing health issues, they're now considering regulation and labeling policies. They are now considering labeling ultra-processed foods as if, with a warning like cigarettes or with a warning like alcohol. These types of, warning labels, obviously food manufacturers, they don't like that.
Yeah.
This stuff is already happening in other countries. And they're like, well, not here in the US of A. We can pay to make that go away, can't we?
Can you give me an example of this? Like, I don't know. I'm just kind of hitting you in the, like, is there an example of a food or a thing that they even give in the article there, or that you can think of off the top of your head that they've slapped a warning or should have a warning on, or is probably going to have a warning label on?
So in other countries, this is actually, Latin America was actually they were kind of the pioneers of putting these labels on processed foods. So Mexico was actually one of the first countries to do this. They have a pretty significant obesity issue in that country as well. And it'll be something like, say, Oreos, something that contains large amounts of sugar, large amounts of saturated fat, large amounts of sodium. All of these types of ingredients in other countries, there's a call out on the label that, this contains more than your, daily recommended amount of saturated fat or sugar or sodium or whatever. And they're usually in the form of it's like a little black stop sign that basically calls out how much of those, quote, harmful ingredients are in the product.
Yeah. So that's interesting because there really has been no regulation of what they can put on there, as so long as it, quote unquote, doesn't impact somebody's health negatively, like keto, this, like gut gut health that, they can, whether it's true or not, they can throw it on there.
Yeah.
And in this case, that's, hydrogenated fats, saturated fats, additional sugars and things like that. This kind of leads to this because if we said like hydrogenated fat doesn't lead to obesity, right? Now we're taking it like a next level down from say the ultra processed foods. A lot of them have this additional hydrogenated fat in there because it's shelf stable and whatever else. They're saying they're focused on the ultra processed food, but they're not focusing on what is in the ultra processed food that could be creating an issue. And at the same time, people are skirting around, it doesn't really cause obesity though. But the reality of it is, whether there's a study that shows a person eats ultra processed food all the day, and maybe they're not overweight because they're under eating their daily caloric need.
Yeah, it's possible to eat ultra processed foods and not be obese.
Yeah, let's talk about this.
Yeah. So that's actually the interesting part of the article where, we have that screaming headline about ultra processed foods not causing obesity. And then if you scroll down just a little bit here, you see that, let's see, where is it here? Well, essentially they say that, here it is. But the snippet suggests there is nothing intrinsic about processed food that causes obesity and that the amount of calories one eats is the most important factor for weight gain. What do you know?
Yeah.
If you eat more calories, you will gain weight. And so the food manufacturers or the food industry are saying, well, see, no, it's about the amount of calories somebody is eating. It's not about the ultra processed food. If they're still eating in at caloric maintenance or in a caloric deficit, then these ultra processed foods aren't going to make them obese. So no, there doesn't need to be a warning label because it doesn't cause obesity. It only greatly increases your likelihood of overeating.
Yeah,
that's the issue.
Exponentially. And so that's the next thing I want to talk about.
Yeah.
So what is inherently, and I hate putting, good or bad on this, but I'll say it. What's inherently not good, so I'll just take a little different route, not good about ultra processed foods when we talk about this caloric density and kind of the direction we're going here.
So first, let's clarify the definition because there is somewhat of a definition. Right. There is a governing body of like, okay, what are we talking about when we're talking about an ultra processed food? And then we'll talk about the ingredients and how those are manipulated. So the agency or whatever you want to call it, it's called NOVA. NOVA, like a bitch in Nova, Chevy Nova. And they're from Brazil, actually. And they define the ultra-processed foods as industrial formulations of processed food substances that contain little or no whole foods and typically include flavorings, colorings, emulsifiers, and other cosmetic additives.
Sounds healthy and delicious to me.
Yeah, sounds like something I would whip up in my kitchen.
Right. But the reality of it is some of them are fucking delicious.
Oh yeah, and they are designed to be. And there's a few ways that essentially these food chemists that work for these giant companies, they are manipulating our instinctual desires for things like sodium, like fat, like sugar, and brightly colored things. So from an instinctual standpoint, biologically, we are geared to seek those things. We're geared to seek fat because of its caloric density. Sugar was something that was not highly available when we were, cavemen and women. So that was something, again, for its energy density that we sought out. Sodium was not something that we were getting a ton of from our diets, ancestrally. So we seek out sodium and we seek out things that are brightly colored. They stand out to us. So instinctually, these are all cues for us that we should eat that. We should eat more of that. So although the ultra-processed food, if eaten in moderation, doesn't necessarily cause obesity, moderating your intake of those foods is very difficult because instinctually, biologically, we are geared to want to overeat those things. But obviously, our food landscape is much different than it was 5,000 years ago.
Yeah. So in having this conversation, I know there's going to be people listening to this go, dude, well, that just means you're weak. You have to make better choices.
Okay, yeah, tough guy, have one Pringle.
Exactly. There's not a person that could say that hasn't also been on the other side of it for whatever reason at whatever point in their life. So I get where you would say like, well, you just have to control your caloric intake.
Just have more willpower.
Yeah, exactly. That goes a ways until it doesn't anymore. It's like the word motivation.
Yeah.
Motivation only goes so far until it doesn't. And so going back to the palatability of food and, kind of what we're pre-programmed to do. It's hard-coded in our DNA, right?
Yeah, we seek these things.
Exactly. And some based on availability, based on your knowledge, based on how hungry you are, whether you're getting food or not. You may seek these things in a different way at different times, at a different level than other people. But the bottom line is you can't undo this, right? It's there.
Yeah, it's something
it's nature.
It's something
nature.
That's in our DNA, like you said.
So go back to the palatability piece. What we're talking about is the hyperpalatability of these foods, and that's been engineered. So effectively,
it's intentional.
It's not overwriting your DNA. It's just feeding.
It's appealing to it.
It's appealing. Yeah. So you got these foods going in. That's what I meant about them being delicious. Like,
of course they are.
It doesn't like a fucking Oreo.
Yeah.
Like it tastes
ice cream.
Right.
Tastes great.
Tastes great. You're right. So, I mean, you got the sugar, you got the fat, you got the texture, all of those things.
Texture, color, all that stuff.
Those are all very instinctual, as you mentioned, things that our body wants to have. So, for those people that are going, oh, well, I just have more willpower than the other person. Yeah, you probably do in a lot of ways. And so that's fine, but that is not the majority of the population.
Yeah.
And the majority of the population is influenced likely more by these guidelines that we're talking about than the much smaller part of the population that you might be very, very critical of, right? And I am too. Like I from a critical perspective, it's just like, hey, I want that smaller part of the population to just grow a little bit. If we can just have a little bit of effect on a very small part of that large population, I will feel really good about getting good information out there. That's why we do what we do.
We've informed a few more people.
Exactly. So going back to this, I just want to jump back to the hyperpalatability piece of this. This is a real thing. I mean, we talk about different things. We were talking about the energy drink stuff, or whatever, and how palatable those things are. It's got the right amount of sweet, the right amount of tang, depending on what you like, the right amount of
carbonation,
bubbles, and all that stuff. Or
the mouthfeel, how the can feels in your hand.
I mean, this doesn't just happen. This literally happens in a lab or in a tasting house.
It's intentional. Yeah.
Yeah. So this stuff is engineered. And, some people might understand that, and other people, they've never heard of that before. So that if you're one of those people who's like, yeah, I know all about this. Well, maybe this conversation isn't for you in that sense. It's more around like the other things that this type of stuff impacts. And I guarantee you have a family member or you have somebody you love in your life or whatever like that, or some type of relationship. Well, they are impacted by these things and they don't know why. They don't have any clue.
Yeah,
so
they have no insight. So, I mean, this might be a helpful statistic to point out. Oh, well, ultra-processed food, maybe it's not, me and all the people that I know, we all know that you shouldn't be eating processed food.
Yep.
Well, the estimate is that 60 to 75% of the energy intake by Americans is from ultra-processed foods.
That's
so
wild.
The majority, up to potentially 3/4 of the calories that typical Americans are consuming are from ultra-processed foods, compared to Europe, less than 40%.
Is that right?
It could be even lower than that.
The
estimate I saw was pretty wide, but 40% or less compared to 60 to 75% in the U.S.
Yeah, that's a scary number.
Yeah, we eat more processed food than any country in the world by a long shot.
And are we producing it as well? Are we the larger producers of this processed food, ultra-processed food?
I don't know that for sure, but probably. I would think so if I had to venture a guess.
I mean, from a business perspective, that's the size of your market. Yeah, that's probably why it's gotten to where it's at.
Yeah, and that's really the larger conversation around these dietary guidelines is these food manufacturers, they want to continue with business as usual because business is booming. And there actually has been data now that it's been long enough in some of these countries that have instituted these labels that it actually does have an effect on people's buying choices. If it's, it's the same thing they did with cigarettes. If there's a big black label on it saying this will kill you, there's going to be less likelihood that you buy it. Some people still will because that is the choice that they're making. But it could affect some people, that little reminder every time you buy that food, like, maybe you shouldn't be eating this. Maybe you shouldn't be eating this. That has an effect over time. So that is kind of, again, that's the larger conversation here. But as far as, ultra-processed foods and obesity, it's not a straight line.
Yeah.
And that is the loophole that the food lobbyists are trying to to take advantage of. It's like, well, it doesn't necessarily cause it. However, there is a number of studies that have shown, I think it was it 2020? There was a recent study that was kind of considered a groundbreaking study that people who were eating a higher percentage of ultra-processed foods would eat up to 500 calories more per day, essentially not even knowing it, unconsciously consuming 500 extra calories per day just based on the type of food that they're consuming.
That's scary.
Yeah.
I mean, it's no wonder the obesity epidemic is the way it is.
Yeah. So majority of people are eating these foods all the time. And you look around us and you see, okay, yeah, there's clearly something going on here.
Yeah. So again, you're not drawing a straight line, but let's just kind of walk through this a little bit. Yeah. So I'm eating 500 additional calories above whatever my maintenance is for the day. So that's probably
unbeknownst to you.
Unbeknownst to me. So that there's problematic in a couple of ways. I'm over consuming and I'm not aware of it. Yeah. Right. So that's a challenge, right? In and of itself.
It's sneaky.
That is sneaky. And so that, in a sense, may be like the awareness piece, that we put out there. But I think there's different levels of awareness as you get down, as you go down the list here, and inside that definition, we're talking about very low nutrient density.
Yeah.
So not only are you putting in, we're talking about, you just said 500 additional calories. We're not talking about the makeup of those calories.
Yeah.
So where are they coming from? So I already mentioned like a lot of the additional, you mentioned it to start, but the additional saturated fat, specifically hydrogenated fat, so that it stays shelf stable and it can be packaged and mixed with these other things. You also mentioned sugar because it tastes delicious, right? And
we're drawn to it naturally.
We're drawn to it. It's just, again, hard-coded in our DNA. And so when you start to look at like macronutrient wise, what's in this, and then the type of how those macronutrients are being delivered. So again, saturated fat versus unsaturated fat. Fat is fat, but at the same time, we know there are benefits to some more than others. And there is also negative effects of having some excess, more than other. Yeah, right? So same on the sugar side. We know sugar is not going to inherently kill you. It's not dangerous, not bad for you.
You're prone to overconsume it, though.
The concentrations of it, right, depending on, obviously lead to additional caloric intake and can impact your physiology if you're imbalanced. Then again, we can talk about the proteins and the quality of that protein that may or may not be in that ultra-processed food.
It most likely is not. So that would be,
That's a major concern. So that's another factor or something to take a look at. So if I am consuming 500 additional calories of low density or low nutrient density food, high in fat, high in sugar, whatever the case, I'm also going to be undernourished in terms of the other things that would be onboarded with those macronutrients. Vitamin mineral profiles, amino acids, polyphenols,
antioxidants, all that type of whole food stuff. Yeah.
So not only do we have a person that's over consuming a very low nutrient dense food, they're also undernourished, which might be hard for people to kind of comprehend.
They might, they're overweight but undernourished. So it's a double whammy.
Yeah. So nourishment meaning, are you giving your body the things it needs in order to live vibrantly, repair, recover, and remain active? So the major currency is always the same at the end of the day in terms of energy. So no matter what type of energy you put in your system, your body's going to figure out a way to use it or store it. That's just at a base level. That's what it is. Mm-hmm. But the quality of that energy that you're putting in there means everything with regard to your health.
Yeah, how you're feeling.
And your efficiency and your effectiveness, right? And the things that happen. So it's more than just you're overeating shitty food. Mm-hmm. You're also under-eating the things that keep you healthy and help you fight against things like, if we want to really boil it down and get super morbid here, that fight the cancers, that fight the diabetes, that fight the viruses, and all the things that we're faced with as humans, and that we're continually becoming weaker and weaker at defending as a human population, particularly here in the West.
More and more vulnerable. Yeah. So it creates a vicious cycle in that, you're in a caloric surplus, so you're gaining weight. Now, as I gain weight, I gain body fat. That fat is creating inflammation. And at the same time, I'm undernourished. So my energy levels are low. I'm eating these, typically high carbohydrate or high fat meals. My blood sugar's all over the place. So it creates this this vicious cycle for a lot of people. And then we seek the same foods that are causing the problem in the first place. It's an addiction cycle, really, is what is happening. So you mentioned the protein. That's one. Protein and fiber are the two main nutrients that tend to be absent from these ultra processed foods.
And often, as a result, very underconsumed by the majority of the population, as you just stated.
Yeah. So that's probably the two most common deficiencies that I see in terms of kind of broad nutrients. People are not eating enough protein and they're not eating enough fiber. Protein and fiber are both going to help stabilize your blood sugar, curb cravings. They're more satiating. So when we are not consuming those, when we're eating a high percentage of foods that do not contain protein and fiber, now all of a sudden we're hungry all the time. Our blood sugar is all over the place. We're wondering why we're always crashing in the afternoon. I'm always having cravings for sweets. Like, what's happening to me? It must be hormones.
Willpower, dude. Just use your willpower.
Yeah. Or it's a matter of, you just lack discipline. You just need to be more disciplined about your cravings. You need to be more disciplined about what your inputs, and then you won't have to worry so much about those types of things. But that's really kind of the trap that people get caught in with these ultra processed foods, is their diets are heavily skewed in favor of carbohydrates. They're on this blood sugar roller coaster all the time of crash, spike, crave. And it just continues like that. And they feel crappy all the time. And now we're seeking these hyperpalatable foods that also kind of give us a pleasure response as well. I feel like crap, my energy's low. Now
it's hitting all the buttons.
Yeah. And now I eat this, whatever it is. And now all of a sudden I feel a little better for an hour.
For a minute.
I'm a little perked up. Mm-hmm. So, I say all that to, I guess, just point out that, this is, don't get fooled by the propaganda, I guess, is the main bullet point that we're driving at here. Because that's really what this is food industry propaganda. Like, no, ultra processed foods don't cause obesity. And then I sent you that Instagram. Right. I was trying to find that specific article that I sent you where the headline was overeating doesn't cause obesity. So overeating doesn't cause obesity. Ultra-processed foods don't cause obesity. I'm really confused as to what's causing 75% of my fellow Americans to be fat.
And be either diabetic or pre-diabetic.
Yeah. If it's not overeating and it's not ultra-processed foods, people must be just consuming way too much, I don't know, kale? What are they? What are we overeating?
I don't know. We should look at the kids and, they're not even grown-ups yet. And and that obesity epidemic is hitting that population more than anybody else. What is it? Is it because they're eating kale?
Yeah.
And lean protein.
Yeah.
And
I don't think so.
And avocados and, eggs and dairy and all that shit.
Brightly colored whole foods. Yeah. We're not.
Again, trying to connect a straight line, it's that when you say loophole, it's a ridiculous article or headline. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's a ridiculous headline to say that, ultra-processed foods do not cause obesity. Nobody fucking said that. Yeah. Nobody said that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, to your point, and I'll say it because you didn't say it this way, it's like, well, look around. Look around, because if you know somebody in your life that is really struggling with their weight and their health, and you looked inside those cupboards at home, not what they tell you, but what's actually there, right? And what they're actually consuming on a daily basis. I don't know any overweight people that are purely focused on eating as close to the earth as they can on a regular basis, right? Like, again, and there's nothing wrong with consuming some processed food. In fact, I encourage it, for people to get the calories in that they need in the efficiency and the effectiveness that they need to get.
A protein bar is a processed food at the end of the day.
Hell yeah. And to be honest, I don't recommend a lot of those because I just, I think there's other cool processed foods that you could eat, but at the same time, for whatever your reasons are. But the point of that, again, of that is, just look around. Like, the most unhealthy people in our nation are not the people that are shopping at, in the produce aisles and on the meat counters and buying the foods that we've sort of already mentioned. They're not doing that.
Yeah.
They're buying what's in a box, what's in a can, what's in a package, in a plastic package, what's convenient, what can be thrown in the microwave, what's in the frozen food section. And you can find all kinds of good stuff in those places too.
Yeah.
But the reality of it is
people aren't looking that hard.
Right. And so if you're trying to draw a line with like, well, all processed food is bad. No, not saying that. All ultra processed food is going to kill you. No, we're not saying that either. But I get where the food manufacturers are going like, well, if you start saying that, that's going to create some problems for us. And my thing would be as a food manufacturer, because we know how they operate in major corporations operate in general.
It's about profit.
It's about profit at the end of the day, and I'm going to do what I need to do. Right? I have shareholders to fulfill. You know, I have obligations I need to fulfill too. Like, I'm going to do what I need to do. So going back, where does this manifest? Where does this wind up? Going back to these food guide regulations. Well, how should the consumer expect to see these rolled out? I know you're not on the board and you don't control this stuff, but based on history and where it is now, I guess I would say, what's your take? Like, how do you see this coming down the pipe? What's
next? Yeah. Well, I mean, unfortunately, my kind of pessimistic take as a lifelong citizen of this country is that the lobbyists will probably win to a degree. At least to some degree, in terms of like, will we see these types of labeling practices or regulations roll out with these 2025 guidelines? I kind of doubt it. I would like to think that we're going to make some progress in terms of getting closer to these types of policies. And that's the funny thing about this article as well, that it has this big headline, ultra processed foods do not cause obesity. But then when you actually read through the whole article, as few people ever do, all of these dietitians and people that they're talking to, none of them are endorsing ultra processed foods at all. They're like, no. Like, these are definitely not good for you. Just from a purely scientific standpoint, we cannot draw that straight line. But
at least they're being honest there.
That is just that's part of the scientific process. But none of these dietitians that they're talking to, they're all like, no. Like, we should not
generally agree.
Yeah, we should not be consuming these as extensively as we are, or excessively as we are.
I think that's a really important distinction to make, because even with all the stuff we talk about on the show or elsewhere with our clients, like, we're not going to these extremes or planting flags in certain camps. I think we're very careful about not doing that. What we're trying to do is just go, hold on, nobody's saying this, but nobody's saying that either.
It's not so black and white.
It isn't so black and white. So, and I reference this phrase a lot. I think a lot of times I feel very confident about some of the things we talk about, including this. Like, most of the real experts, and when I say real experts, I mean those people that aren't being polluted by some lobbyist money, aren't being polluted by some political agenda, aren't being polluted by some manufacturer, aren't being polluted by some grant money that funded their study to come up to a certain conclusion.
They're beholden to,
correct, or just somebody that wants to take their shirt off and talk about things on Instagram because it gets attention. So I'm talking about like professionals. When I say experts,
so the 4 people who don't fall into any of those categories.
Yeah, let's say some worthy professionals. They all tend to agree. They might have some different opinions about a few things, but when it comes down to the base stuff, they tend to agree. And this isn't, in that sense, it's not that hard. If you want an answer, you can find it. Again, the Daily Mail is a tough place for me to get information from, but I appreciate you staying on top of it and looking after it, right? And just going, oh boy, here we go, man. Here's another one.
Yeah.
Not so that this can be gratuitous. Like, I've said this before on other podcasts. Like, I don't want to have gratuitous conversations. I just want to have conversations that maybe help people connect some dots. Not the one that goes directly from ultra processed foods to obesity, but maybe some of the ones in between, to understand how they do contribute. And they 100%, whether you don't have to show me a scientific study to show me or to prove to me that it's happening. At the same time, I'm not naive enough to say that this is the problem, right?
Yeah, it's just completely isolated. Yeah.
It's part of a larger problem. But I would also say to the person who I sort of was referencing at the beginning, like, oh, well, these people just need to have more willpower. It's really not that hard. Well, I think you're kind of being an idiot. Like, to say something like to me, that's spoken by somebody who truly has never worked with people that are challenged for way more reasons than willpower, right, in their life. And so, maybe just take it easier on people, but also understand the things that they're up against. But I will say this. I think I'm not mad at that article, like, because specifically with regard to it looks like the experts are tending to agree, and they're going like, hold on, time out. Like, no, we didn't say that.
Yeah.
We can't say that. But at the same time, there's some concerns. And at the same time, I think another positive is maybe, just maybe, and I like to have a little hope sometimes that food manufacturers may be faced with a little bit more scrutiny.
Yeah.
and they may
That's
have
the
to
hope.
they may have to answer for some things. What's the reality of that? I don't know.
Like how it would actually manifest in terms of what you see on the shelves.
I have no idea. I mean, I guess we're going to see. I mean, we could
Yeah.
talk about that when the time comes. When do the guidelines actually hit, man?
So I don't know if it's supposed to be for 2025 to 2030. So I think they're
By the end of the year or something?
completing their review, I guess, by the end of the year. And that's kind of why this article came out, because it was, there have been other regulations in terms of certain like nutrient content that food manufacturers have to include and certain labeling practices.
Also,
But
some of the ingredients they're putting in stuff like the whole hot Cheetos thing that came up in California. I don't know if you remember that. When
something about their banning like the dye they use.
The dye, that kind of stuff. So that stuff happens throughout the 5-year period or whatever all the time. But you're talking about something very different.
Yeah. Well, they do this every 5 years. So they're kind of reviewing the science, reviewing the research in order to formulate these new guidelines. And they always, are shifting based on, what do we see as the kind of prevailing problems in our culture or our society right now as far as food is concerned. So again, this is something that like Mexico started doing this in 2010. So multiple Latin American countries followed suit. Multiple European countries are already doing this. So there's multiple other developed countries that already have these types of labels on their food. And they don't have the same level of obesity issues that we have here, where we spend more than anyone, and yet we're sicker and fatter than any country in the history of the world. And that's not an exaggeration.
So maybe there's another positive takeaway from this. And maybe this is the thing. Maybe this is the step in the right direction to maybe reversing this as America is trying to catch up, which is an interesting thing to say when you think about, the United States being so far in front in so many ways.
Not in this category.
Well, they are in this category with regard to sick and fat people.
Yes.
We're winning.
Absolutely leading the league.
We're fucking champions.
MVPs.
Yeah. And we're the champions at how much it costs us to take care of those people.
Exactly.
Right. And that's not going away anytime soon. So maybe this is a step in reducing how long it takes to get there. I don't know. But I think we should reserve the right to maybe come back and revisit this in the next few months.
Check back in when the dietary guidelines for Americans come out for the next 5 years.